Hi, my name's David, and I want to share with you my story of how I got my first developer job. It took me 2 years from deciding that I wanted to become a software engineer to getting my first job. And these 2 years, it wasn't 2 years doing it on the side part-time. Those 2 years giving it everything I had, learning how to code, applying to jobs. I applied to over 458 companies, and I learned a lot from this process, so I want to share with you what I've learned. My coding journey began in May 2020. Before coding, I was working as a nightclub promoter in Las Vegas, and I was doing it for 2 years, and I really loved that job. And everyone around me knew that I was passionate about it. But COVID happened, and I got furloughed from my job. And I know I could have just waited until things got better, but I decided that it was time to move on because I wanted to work remotely. I wanted to do something that expresses my creativity, and I like the innovation in tech. So I decided to pursue software engineering. So I started teaching myself through YouTube, free Bootcamp, and it started off great, but I quickly came across two main problems when teaching myself. The first one was that these tutorials started off super easy, such as this is how you add, this is what a string is, but it started off easy and then quickly escalated to something that was really hard, and that jump I wasn't able to do on my own. Another problem I faced is that I'll do tutorials, and when you're copying along, following the tutorial line by line, but somewhere along you make a mistake, or sometimes the versions aren't the same, or something is how you set up your machine. So you get an error, and you don't know how to solve this error when you're just following the tutorial at the very beginner level. So you get stuck, you do some Googling on Stack Overflow, but you don't have the fundamental knowledge to figure it out. So you just kind of give up on that tutorial. I find myself repeating this process. I would do a tutorial, get stuck, couldn't figure it out, and just move on. So those are the two main problems I noticed when self-teaching. So in September 2020, I decided to take a coding bootcamp at UC Berkeley Extensions. This helped me in two major ways. The first way was that it gave me the right environment. I was surrounded by people who wanted to code and wanted to improve their lives. Because before, I kind of felt alone in my coding journey. All my colleagues in the Vegas nightlife industry, they weren't investing in themselves during this time. They were just kind of hanging out. So there was a lot of negative news going on, and it just made me feel alone during this process. So I like being around the right environment of people who wanted to code and get better. And then the second thing was that I got help. The coding bootcamp had ample amount of help between your instructors, your TA, you can ask your fellow colleagues, classmates, and they also had mentors as well. So when I ran into the case that I had before where I had a bug, I had someone help me debug what's going on. I had people that I can pair program with, so that helped me significantly. I remember one time I had a bug that I asked my instructor, and on the inside, I felt so stressed out. I was all panicked, but my instructor just systematically helped me debug the problem. It was like, try this, and then you can try this, and then you can try this. And we eventually figured out how to solve the problem. And I was just amazed by his calmness during the entire process, and he was so confident that we were able to solve the bug. So I really took that to heart of how to debug and stay calm and see how other people solve problems. And you also, about the help topic, hear advice that to get good at coding, you should just build projects. But I find that there's a big gap between learning and then building a project. What you need in between is some pair programming or someone at a higher level give you guidance as you code that project. So that is what the coding bootcamp gave me. It helped me give guidance on how to solve coding projects, and it put me in the right environment. So I was able to finish the coding bootcamp. It was a 3-month intensive coding bootcamp. And then I started to apply for jobs, and I started to get interviews. And in terms of the interviews, I noticed that a lot of companies have these technical assessments. And for the most part, they're usually data structures and algorithm problems. They're usually around 3 to 5 problems long, and usually between 60 to 120 minutes. So in these problems, they give you an algorithm problem, and they'll have like these test cases on percentage. And they use this as a screening to see if you're able to move on to the next round for an actual interview. So when I first got these technical assessments, I would fail them all the time. And it was so frustrating to take these tests and not be invited for even an interview. And I decided that I would have to get very good at solving these data structures and algorithm problems. I want to emphasize the part in solving them as well, because in the coding bootcamp, they emphasize a lot on being able to communicate how you solve these problems during the interview. But with these technical assessment and screening, you don't even get the chance to communicate your thoughts. It's just a simple test case percentage. So you have to be able to solve these algorithm problems. So I spent a lot of time doing lead code, and I got Algo Expert as well, but I found the problem like I faced with other coding platforms where they started off easy, but quickly escalated in difficulty. So I just started doing a lot of lead code because they have a lot of easy problems, and just had to study how the solutions were made and try to do them myself. And I also made tutorials on how to do them as I learned to do them. And eventually, I was able to pass these algorithm problems and have technical interviews with engineers. But I've noticed that I focused so much on these algorithm problems, I kind of forgot like coding, the part of like the practical coding part, like front end and back end development. So whenever I would have a take-home project, I wouldn't have passed them. And then whenever I interviewed with these engineers, they would ask me coding topics, and I would be able to communicate my technical abilities in practical coding. So it was just an endless cycle of focus on algorithms, and then I'll focus on either like front end, like React, and then forget about algorithms, and then I focus on back end, database, APIs, and then forget about front end. So between algorithms, front end, and back end, it felt like an endless cycle where I'll learn something, forget it, learn something, forget it. And that's the struggle I face. But then I decided that I just have to keep at it and forget a little bit less each time during that cycle. Eventually, I was able to get a job, but not a development job. I got a job, a part-time job at the coding bootcamp I did, working as a learning assistant. So what this is that you can think of it as office hours for the coding bootcamp, where students will come in Slack, and they will ask a question about the code, like, hey, I have this bug, can you help me solve this error? When I took this job, it quickly exposed my lack of understanding, because the students were asking me questions and I didn't know how to help them. I had to ask a lot of my colleagues, how can I help the student on this ticket? So it really exposed the technical understanding I had about coding. So what I decided to do was that I redid the entire coding bootcamp curriculum. So all the class activities, all the homeworks, excluding the group projects. But I did all these so I can better understand the technical concepts, help me become a better engineer, and help these students out. I stopped applying for jobs, looking for a full-time job, and just focused strictly on that part-time job until I completed that bootcamp again. So I was able to complete the bootcamp, and I literally became one of the worst learning assistants on my team to one of the best ones, where I was helping other colleagues help them debug the problems. And I eventually got promoted as a senior learning assistant for the company. So once I finished redoing the bootcamp again, I decided that it was time for me to enter the job market again. So this was another iteration of entering the job market. But again, I faced the same struggles. Whenever I interviewed with engineers, they saw the flaws of my technical capabilities even after I did the coding bootcamp again. And what I did end up getting was an unpaid internship at a startup I found on Angels List. And I know that there's a lot of stigmas saying that you should never take an unpaid internship. But in reality, this is the only thing I can get. And I saw that it will help me achieve my goals to getting a full-time job as a developer. So I took it, and it was great. I learned a lot from it. My technical ability got a lot better from it. But it didn't work out where I worked for them full-time afterwards. So I would have to enter the job market again once my internship ended. But before I entered the job market again, I noticed that during my technical interviews, the engineers would ask me about different aspects of the projects that I did. But the projects that I had on my resume were group projects. I didn't do certain parts of it where my team members did, and they would ask about these parts, and I wouldn't know. For example, they would ask me, how did I use authentication for this application, where I had another team member do it. So before I entered the job market again, I created my own full stack application that I wanted to do without anyone's help. So when an engineer asks me about it, I can explain every single line of code in my project, and I can explain why I decided to do what I did, why I decided to code the way I wanted, why I decided to use certain tech stacks that I did to them during my interviews. And I also took a little bit of time to re-practice algorithm problems, and then I entered the job market again. And eventually, I was able to get an offer with an apprenticeship program at a tech company, and ended up accepting the offer and working there full time. So the main takeaway is that I really had to baby step my job process and grow incrementally day by day. And it's really tough out there because you see other people getting jobs in the half the time that I did, in a fraction of the time that I did. But you have to keep focused, stay committed, not give up, think of ways to get better, and keep going. I decided that I wanted to become a software engineer. I didn't care how long it took. I didn't care how much money I had to invest. And eventually I was able to do it. And you can do it as well. Don't give up. Keep going. You got this.